Welcome to Diverse Joy, a podcast where two so-called experts put the joy back into diversity discussions. I am here with my smart and cozy, and let's face it, the true star of this podcast, my co-host, Dr. Amber Nelson.
And my co-host is the sparkly, fabulous, and brilliant, fun Dr. Will Cox. And actually, he is the star of the show. So, Will, again, as we always do, what's bringing you joy?
All right. So we are in June, which of course is a Pride Month, which means there are so many fun parties and parades and concerts and all fun gay stuff. And so I'm very excited and joyful about that. I always love going to those kinds of events, coming together with the gay community.
Yes.
And me and my friends have an excuse to let loose and partay. And all that good stuff. So I'm really excited for all of that.
Yes.
And how about you, Amber? What is bringing you joy this June?
Joy. Well, June is my birthday month, so I always enjoy my birthday because I do actually like aging, as I've said in an earlier episode. But at this time of year, in Portland and where I lived back in Baltimore, they both spaces, which was lucky for me, had movies in the park, movies on the lawn, and different spaces. And it's first of all, obviously, I think if you've made it this far in our podcast, you can tell that we really like movies and TV, and I love movies. I enjoy them. It's like the thing that I love to do in my downtime, and being able to go outside and to a park and kind of engage in like kind of community engagement and care and be outside. I always say like I'm not an outdoorsy person, but I'm an out of doors person, meaning I like being outside, but just not like lost in the woods. But being at a park and being able to watch a movie, sit on the lawn in the grass and just be exposed to nature and to other folks is such it brings me so much joy. It is so much fun. And again, it's just a really great opportunity to be with my community.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, so much fun.
So, for those of you who are audio only listeners, to give you a little visual picture that our video watchers
yes.
have. So today's topic is wellness, and our outfits embody two varieties of wellness. So Amber is in a very cozy, Fenty casual
lounge set. Yes.
And I am decked out too for a night on the town, wearing this fancy shirt I bought,
beautiful,
covered in expensive looking rhinestones. And it was an expensive shirt, so I assume that they are in fact expensive. This is actually my first time wearing the shirt because I leave it packed up in the tissue paper it came in. But I love sparkling.
It is
very sparkly.
It is very sparkly, and it is gorgeous. It makes me so happy. And also for our audio listeners, I love sparkly things. I wear sparkly glasses every single episode except for maybe one where I wore my rainbow glasses. So it makes me happy to like see you in your sparkles.
Thank you. And the two forms of wellness I was alluding to or mentioning. So one is the kind of more inward focus, more what we think of as kind of self-care in a more traditional sense of massages or pedicures or those kinds of things the wellness industry kind of focuses on. But we also wanted to focus on the more social kind of wellness and self-care, which is then what my going out outfit exemplifies. So like sometimes wellness is about going out and being with your people
Absolutely.
and being social and letting them recharge you.
Yes,
And so
100%.
we're going to hear a lot of great things, discuss a lot of great things. Amber
Yeah.
has some stuff prepared. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to get into it.
Yes, me too.
Amber, what's wellness all about?
Yeah, you know, this is one of my soapboxes. If I'm going to be perfectly honest, my poor students hear me
Designer soaps that are made for wellness.
Soaps specifically created for wellness. Yes. To enhance all the properties. Yes. You know, they hear me talk about it all of the time. Every single year I bring it up multiple times. Because our world was not created for us to do wellness well. And we harp on self-care all the time.
Such a buzzword.
It's such a buzzword. And I think that, you know, we hear it, and as a psychologist, as clinical psychologists, we use it all the time. Like, you really need to be engaging in self-care and take care of yourself and da-da-da-da. But then we don't set up our systems. And again, I'm as a faculty member and academia, like I'm telling you to take care of yourself, but then like recognizing like, oh, but you also have to do X number of hours of internship and do all of your assignments to excellence and do your dissertation and take care of all of these things and not create any space for you to actually take care of yourself or message to you that you need to do that.
And you're talking about what your students have
My
to do.
students.
I know a little bit of what you have to do as a professor,
Right.
like watching over the students, being on their dissertation committees,
Right.
teaching your classes,
Right.
prepping your classes, doing the
Exactly.
clinical work. And, you know, when we try to schedule stuff for the podcast,
Right.
I am just like, how does she do it?
Where does, and you know, and I talk about it like, you know, as academics, we talk a lot about like research as me search, like the things that I like impact me and that I care about. Part of the reason wellness is such a big thing for me is because I'm not very good at it. And I have to constantly remind myself, I have to be so intentional about how do I think about wellness and taking care of myself in all of these spaces. But one of the things I like to talk about is that we often think about self-care, taking care of oneself as, and you mentioned earlier, right, that we think about it as isolation. If I'm going to take care of myself, I have to completely cut myself off from everything. I need to only go and get a massage. I need to be by myself. I need to meditate. I need to have all of this luxurious time and money to take care of myself. And it has become its own industry, right? Like the self-care industry. Again, like you said, you know, designer soaps and like taking a bath and like doing a massage and all of these things, which I am not opposed to, right? Like I'm in my lounge set because I love lounging around and I love engaging in those things, right? And that is one form. And also that is not the only way that we're taking care of ourselves and replenishing ourselves. Sometimes it also means connecting to community and reclaiming parts of ourselves that we have left behind. Because as we go through our life and through our day-to-day activities, it's really easy for the things that take the most energy, that take a lot of energy, be that our work or the things that are stressing us out, to be the thing that we focus ourselves on, right? To the exclusion of the other parts of our identity, the other parts of ourself. And so because we're giving it that much more attention, if we go back to a scale, I think last episode, attentional, like the attentional spotlight, right?
Yeah.
We're giving so much attention to this one part of ourselves that we have lost touch with who we are. It creates this idea that it is occupying so much of our mind space, and part of taking care of oneself or coming back to a sense of wellness is reconnecting to the parts of ourselves that we have cut off, whether that is our community, and like going out and enjoying yourselves a night on the town, right?
Yeah.
Or that's reconnecting with my partner, right? Like often
Yeah.
our partners, our kids, things like that, folks like that in our life get the short end of the stick and they get the worst parts of us, right?
Yeah.
How do we then reprioritize and give them more of ourselves? How about, our hobbies, our activities, these things that like really make us whole. And so one of the ways in which I have started to talk about wellness and self-care is to remove the term self and self-care to this idea of soul care. And soul care really initially came out of kind of this like kind of theological seminary practice or a spiritual practice. But I think that, we all have souls, right? Like our essence, the
So
essence of
secular
us.
people can also do soul
Yes,
care.
everybody can do soul care, meaning like whatever tends to your soul, what that's inner
That kind of
spirit.
figurative soul doesn't have to be
Figurative soul,
the
not like
religious.
necessarily religious or spiritual sense, but like who you are as a person. And that soul care may include spiritual practices, right? But it doesn't have to. It's about, again, thinking about how do I reconnect with the things that make me me? And that might be reconnecting with community and engaging in community care as well.
Yeah.
In order to get to a sense of wellness. And this is also bucks up against things like grind culture, right? And right now, like that's huge. It's huge in our culture. Is
You want
this-
to define grind culture for listeners who might just,
that
term might not.
That term is like the idea that you have to kind of keep grinding or keep working in order to be successful.
Always
right?
have to be available on email.
Yeah, always available, always working, or having all these side hustles in order to make more money to like maximize your like earning potential, like you're kind of constantly grinding.
Yeah, like if you want to get into knitting as a hobby, gotta open an Etsy shop.
Right,
where you're knitting
that like it
scarves for
needs to
sale.
be productive in some way. And we even hear each other like praising people like, oh wow, you're so busy, like, oh, and it's like almost praising somebody for being overly busy.
Yeah.
To like even this association, like if you're not busy, that you're lazy. And that goes back to a whole other conversation around capitalism and this idea that like your worth and again tied to grind culture is what it's saying is that your worth is tied to how productive you are.
Yeah. Well, and I know that's something I struggle with. So not to turn this into a therapy session, but like I definitely kind of, sometimes when I need a day off, and I make my own schedule. I work for myself essentially, and for the American people
for the people.
But I so much what I do is flexible, and I have something on a given day. If I have scheduled to it, consented to it,
right.
I'm in one way or another making it happen. Right. And that means, sometimes I have a weekday and I haven't really scheduled anything. And it's always like, there's always something I should be working on. Yeah. I could be writing that book about the bias habit breaking training. Right. I could be drafting new podcast topics for us. I could be, and even if I'm like not feeling it, and then I'm like, maybe today can be a TV recharge day. Right. I still have that internal monologue. Yes. That's like, oh, you're being so lazy. Absolutely. Like, why aren't you doing something? Maybe after this episode, you should go and outline a book chapter. Yes. And so then it impedes the ostensibly restful thing. Absolutely. From doing its work of resting and refreshing.
Absolutely. And even if you do kind of decide to do it, that your brain is occupied with all of these other things that you should be doing. And I believe it was
Yeah.
Sandy that kept saying, like, don't shit on yourself, right?
Yeah,
Like,
don't shit all
don't
over
shit all
yourself.
over yourself. And like, that's exactly it. Because then the thing that you have now decided, I'm going to engage in this restful, restorative activity, it no longer is restorative because your brain is occupied with all these other things. And that's a conversation that I have a lot. I work with folks who do, clinicians that do work with trauma and do trauma assessments. This is social workers and medical, providers. And we had a conversation about this not too long ago. And they were like, it's so hard. Not only holding like the work that I do, but it's like I'm constantly doing, somebody in the group was saying, like, I'm constantly doing this like cost analysis, right? If I choose to rest right now, then I am giving up the opportunity to do some cleaning and take care of the kids and to write a book and to like put my time in these other places. And all of these things do end up needing to get done. So I don't feel like I can do that, right? Like there's this constant cost benefit analysis and it's really, really hard to prioritize and say that this is just as important as being quote unquote productive or getting something done.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that I talk about that too is that like we again think about self-care as two parts. One is that we only think to do that after we have fully depleted ourselves, right? Like I am falling asleep. I'm so run down. I'm burnt out. I really need to take a break. I need to do some self-care. And at that point, when you're at that place, you feel like I need days. I need a week. I need a whole day dedicated to like feel restored, to get back to baseline. And so there's two parts that are difficult about that. One is that you wait until you're fully depleted, and two, that you require a bunch of time and energy in order to replenish yourself. My challenge to folks is to say, how do we maintain wellness so that we do not get to the point of overexhaustion, and that we aren't requiring so much time and energy to replenish and restore ourselves. And there are ways for us to like reclaim our time and our energy and finding restorative action that can be done even throughout your day, even if it's a few moments here and there, if it's a internal moment of stopping and being mindful of my breath and my breathing and just like emptying my mind for a moment, centering, regrounding myself. Or it's in small things that bring you joy, right? Then it doesn't mean anybody else has to like find it joyful. It's not for anybody else. It's only for you, but that you have these moments of connection to joy that then give you a moment, just like, again, a moment of restoration because I'm connecting to this thing that I'm doing, right? And for me, one of those things is like wearing my sparkly glasses and Disney bounding and things like that. That's not actually changing how much time I'm dedicating to or taking away from something throughout my day. But every time I remember I'm dressed as Princess Tiana today, right? Like, or I catch a glimpse of the sparkles of my glasses or things like that. There's this moment where I'm reconnecting to my sense of self, that I'm, again, coming back to this idea of expanding my understanding of who I am and not only focusing it on the thing that is causing me stress. It brings me out of that. It gives me this restorative action throughout the day that helps ground me, and it helps bring a sense of like wholeness and restoration to my soul, my being of who I am.
And that really just kind of connects with our kind of fundamental idea or thesis, if you will, behind this podcast is that kind of centering joy and bringing your full self, your authentic self to work or to other contexts.
Yeah.
And how fundamentally that is a joyful thing.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of parts to it. Like I want to acknowledge that like it is very difficult. Our lives are complex. They are challenging, and saying those little small restorative actions, or saying you need to find ways to care for yourself, and this can be really hard to center and to find that space and time. But again, my challenge is being able to say, like, it doesn't have to be luxurious. It doesn't have to be about doing all of these things that feed into this industry and this complex, but it can be spending time with your family. It can be spending time reconnecting to and reprioritizing some of those things.
To be taking a walk in a park.
Taking a walk in
Totally
the park.
free, no money needed.
Taking a walk during your
Hopefully.
lunch break. Taking a lunch break, which,
Yeah.
like sometimes you don't do, and you're legally required or you're supposed to have that time. And often people will still try to like be productive. And I think it's also reframing what baseline is too, right? Like we think that first of all, your value should not and is not tied to your productivity. And also productivity shouldn't feel like overexhaustion. And we often feel like they're equated. And so those are things that are really, really important. And I think, again, when we think about wellness, it's also a really colonized idea, an individualistic idea that misses more traditional, non-colonial views of what wellness is. And sometimes we don't give and honor like indigenous practices and spiritual practices that are really important to wellness. And so I think bringing those things into how we understand it, and community care too.
And I think something you just said really resonates with me. I mean, everything you say always resonates really well. That's why we do this podcast, because I just love hearing you talk and talking with you. But this idea of what productivity feels like.
Yes. Yeah.
So this idea that like if you're not exhausted, you haven't done the
You're not doing
productivity.
enough. Yeah.
But really, I mean, productivity should feel satisfying.
Exactly.
Like if it's healthy and good kind of productivity. Right. And I know like, well, days we've worked on this podcast, like we've done good work and we finished an episode and we're like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. That feels good. Yeah. And so, and I have that in my non-podcast work as well, where it's like, I've done a good job with something and that feels good. That feels recharging. And so I think focusing on that kind of definition, like being like, if I was productive, I would feel satisfied. Right. If I'm feeling exhausted, you know what? I'm being too overproductive or overworking myself at the very least. And actually less work is what's needed to hit that sweet spot, I guess.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, again, I think that capitalism, if I were to go there, robs us of the opportunity to say that satiation, right? Like satisfaction is enough, right? And that we are good. And there's something about reclaiming our time and our body that is really radical and justice oriented. And Audre Lorde has this quote. I love Audre Lorde.
I think this is like the third or fourth time, but that's fine. That's
great. I have an Audre Lorde or a Maya Angelou quote for just about everything.
Well, and just a moment ago, you quoted, and I'm looking to our producer a little, I believe Maxine Waters.
Yes, Maxine
They're
Waters.
Reclaiming My Time. I love that video of her.
Maxine, yes.
Reclaiming My Time.
Reclaiming my time. Like, reclaiming my time.
That was my mantra for like the rest of the year after that session of Congress where she was.
Yes, I'm highly influenced by strong, powerful Black women. Auntie Maxine is absolutely one of them. But yeah, Audre Lorde, Maya Angelou, Sonia Renee Taylor, like all of those women have such powerful words. And one of the things that Audre Lorde said, and hopefully I'll get all of the words correct, but she said, caring for myself is not self-indulgent. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare, right? And talking exactly like there's this idea that like taking care of myself, especially for those on the margins, being cared for, reclaiming your time, reclaiming your body, that I'm not like, um, uh, what am I trying to say? I don't want to say a slave to. I don't particularly like that term, but I'm not beholden to the system.
Yeah.
That I can come in, I can do my job, do it well, and step out and reclaim what is mine. That is political warfare, because the systems are set up for us to not have ownership of our time, our money, our bodies. And so taking care of me and not allowing it to beat me down to where I have nothing left and I'm burning out and I'm leaving my profession. We're seeing droves and droves and droves of people leaving their professions, especially in healthcare, whether that's, in medicine, social work, psychology,
And then also teachers.
We're seeing that, especially those that are in these helping professions in particular, just leaving, and complete, not just like leaving their job, but like leaving the profession on the whole. And again, our systems are not set up for us to care for ourselves. They're set up for us to produce, to make money, to quote unquote care for others, which isn't always, that's a whole other conversation, but isn't always operationally, in a ways that's fully caring for somebody else. But it's important. And so I know we're just about ready for our break. But I did have a couple of recommendations as far as books in this area. Do I have a moment, or do we need a break now? Okay, yes, good. So I've got 2 minutes. So a few that I want to note is Trisha Hershey's nap. She's got a nap ministry, and the book is called Rest is Resistance. It definitely does have like a spiritual undertone, but it's much more about like Black liberation, feminist movements, and then the spirituality that kind of comes out of that. But it definitely has that tone, but it's very much about rest as resistance, right? And
Nice.
how do we reclaim and lean into rest? My Grandmother's Hands is a trauma book, and about like caring for oneself, that is centered and it's Rizma. Rizma is the first name, and I'm not going to say the name wrong, but and it is a fantastic book that talks about like racialized trauma, but it's really helpful for folks across the board, no matter what your background is. Trauma Stewardship is also a really great book around how to care for oneself, especially when you are engaging with others that have high trauma and the need to care for oneself. And then the last one is Body Keeps the Score, which when I've mentioned several times around how much our mind and our body are connected. When we're not taking care of ourselves mentally or physically, it often comes out in the opposite way. So if I'm not taking care of myself physically, it comes out in my mental health. If I'm not taking care of my mental health, it can also come out in us physically. And Body Keeps the Score really hits on that too.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with some story time.
Woo woo.
All right, welcome back to Diverse Joy, everybody. So we're gonna have some story time now. Yep. Amber has 2 stories that she's bringing in. So as always, we start off with one more negative story because in this podcast we're never shying away from the difficult topics.
Right.
It's just that our overall goal is to get to a place of joy. So we always share one negative story where maybe some kind of bias has happened, and sitting with what that was like a little bit. But then also we add to it a positive story. Sometimes when someone did inclusion well, or maybe slipped up with something and then corrected it in a really affirming way. So again, always focused on that kind of action oriented and positive, leading into joy sort of feeling by the end. So I've gone on long enough. Amber, what are your stories today?
Yeah. So the first one, the more negative one, was right after George Floyd. And, we're in the middle of pandemic, and we had just come off of the heels of Breonna Taylor, reminders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. And, there were a few things that happened that week, and George Floyd, and I believe it was either a Saturday or a Sunday that it happened. And I remember having to go to work on Monday, and I was overwhelmed. And my stories are really about wellness, right? And taking care of oneself. And I remember going to class, and I had to teach class, and it became this thing. Like I was emotionally overwhelmed. I was not in a great space. I was starting to feel really down, sad, and yet I was still expected. There was no acknowledgement from my work space around what had happened, and I was expected to go to work and just keep producing and keep going without anything. No acknowledgement, no like saying, hey, take the day off. Hey, like, how are you doing? Hey, take care of yourself. Like, what do you need? And in fact, in that space where I was, experiencing my own secondary trauma to what was happening in the world and in the space, I had to go in and be the one to facilitate conversation and hold the space as a psychologist and as a faculty member, people that had, a variety of views around this, and folks that were really defending the police officer, and folks that were going through all of this. And I had to balance, and first of all, just be in that space in the first place. Like, I expected to go to work and not take the time off, and then be exposed to having to push my own self, my own experience to the side in service of my work, in service of my students. And I just remember that being extremely hard. I had several classes that day, and the whole day it was sitting in that and facilitating conversation and doing all of this. And it was just doubly traumatizing for me. Right.
And it sounds, well, first off, I'm very sorry that's what you had to go through. And it's all too common.
Right.
I hear similar stories all the time. And it taps into some topics we talked about before. Tokenism, one of them. And so as the only Black woman in your department, well, then it all falls to you, and everyone looks to you to guide things, when that's not really something you signed up for, but by nature of your identity, then extra work you have to do. You're already a part of the traumatized collective.
Yes.
When something bad happens to a member of a group that we identify with, there's always that added trauma of that could happen to me as well. Even if you're not a direct family member, you don't know the person who was hurt. This is something we know happens. Absolutely. And so you're already kind of part of this kind of collective trauma. And then also you need to facilitate discussions on this in our department
in a balanced way. And like,
and then you have, and then it also reminds you that you're the only Black woman in the department. And, and so, it's the way the world was set up is
not for it.
We have to find better ways.
And again, there's the tokenism piece of it. And again, there's the productivity part of it too, of like, this thing happened, but there's still shit to do. Like, there's still things that we have to do. We still have to go to work. You still have to show up. And you still have to, like, okay, I'm, the director of equity and inclusion in my department, let's say, and so when things come up, that's one part of my job too, right? Like, not only as the only Black person in my department, but also as part of my role. And so there's lots of things that intersect in those moments, but especially from a wellness perspective of like, also, how do we care for ourselves in the midst of that? And our spaces also centering us when we need it so that we can care for ourselves. And that's really where my second story comes in. I have a couple examples, but the one that, my other story, and I was trying to think through a couple actually, was it also was in my department. Whereas before it was part of my department, but it was really more focused on like my classroom and kind of institution asking or not acknowledging the need maybe that I would have to take a break. And again, not to say that that's only my institution. I think that this was happening across the board. I was hearing it from many or most or all of my other Black friends in the same time and space. But I remember not so unfortunately, not so long after that, when there were a few other racialized instances that happened in my small community where my institution is. And I, again, it was months later, but not that long after George Floyd and everything. It was kind of at the height of things. And I, again, was still just like, this is a lot. It's a lot for me to hold. And we also had recently had a pretty massive kind of, I call it the Blexodus, is in that like a Black exodus in my institution. We had a ton of folks kind of leave around the same time, and in particular Black folks leave at the same one time for a variety of reasons, and one of them that resigned was my mentor, and he happened to be like the first Black faculty member that I had ever had in my entire teacher that I ever had in my life, and has been that didn't happen until I was in grad school. That's a whole other conversation. So the first Black teacher I ever had was in grad school. But anyway, so he had left. So I was really just on a rough place, and I was telling my department, here are the spaces, here are the things that's going on. And I had one of my more senior faculty, this person whom I love. Her name is Kathleen Gathercole. I love you, Kathleen. And I remember her coming to me afterwards and saying, this is something that I care about, the fact that we're losing Black faculty and staff. I care that these are things that is happening in the community, and you should not have to be the one to head the charge on these things. And she's like, I am taking this on as senior faculty, as somebody who's been in this institution, as somebody who cares about you, so that you don't have to hold that burden. And I get teary because it was so meaningful for me to have the opportunity to be seen in that way, and to say, like, you hold so much already and you don't have to hold this. You have already spoken up and you already stand in that space, and I'm taking that for you. And I'll never forget it. She's now retired from my department, so I'm going to miss her a lot. But she just retired. But having that experience was incredible for me. So absolutely. Having those spaces where, somebody can see you, can step in and say, like, you don't have to be the one to bear this burden. Please take a break. Please take care of yourself. And part of that is like me using my power, my privilege, my position to step in, so that you don't have to hold this, and that you can step away and refresh and replenish and care for yourself. So
that's really beautiful. I'm glad someone came up and did that for you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It was really good.
All right. Well, normally we would do the question next, but when we figured out the question, we thought it would do well to come after the skill.
Yes.
So today's skill is speaking up, which is perfect timing. Stories, right? So speaking up is something that gets emphasized a lot in culture.
Yes.
These days, people are all talking about, you have to speak up when some kind of bias happens. Right. So there's some kind of inequity. You got to speak up about it. There's a lot of research that is out there that can help us when we speak up, specifically to make speaking up more effective. And what I mean by more effective is, ideally, if you're in a workplace or whatever kind of context and some kind of bias happens, when you speak up about it, presumably your goal is to get it so that the person who expressed the bias or people in power to change the bias will will actually do something about it.
Right.
You want positive action to follow from it. And there's a number of guidelines that the research literature gives for how to make that kind of thing happen, how to make it more likely the person hears what you have to say and more likely that they do something about it. Mm-hmm. So first off, when speaking up, you want to target the behavior rather than the person. Mm-hmm. So targeting the person is being like, well, you so-and-so, you're a racist jerk.
Right.
Targeting the behavior
usually doesn't go very well.
Yeah, not going to go well. Targeting the behavior is, when you did this particular thing, it may have reflected a racial bias or whatever kind of bias it is in your particular example. Having a tone of working together rather than finger pointing. Finger pointing, again, hey, you racist jerk. Hey, you sexist jerk. What have you? Goal of working together is, we're all vulnerable to biases. We've learned about a lot of those on this podcast, and in all of our collective goals to work on these things moving forward. Maybe this is something you can work on, making them not feel singled out as much as called in. So some people like that kind of terminology.
Right.
And then also focusing on concrete instances rather than abstract accusations. This is actually just a kind of another form of the first thing I said, targeting the behavior rather than the person. But it's especially attuned to situations where we're talking about a pattern of behavior. So rather than, hey, you're sexist all the time, it's, when this particular thing happened, talking about the specific concrete instances. Yeah. Each of those things makes it more likely the person hears what you have to say, more likely that they won't get defensive, and that they'll take what you have to say to heart and take some kind of action moving forward. Yeah. Relatedly, offer explanations or viable solutions when that's possible. Yeah. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean kind of all the stuff we've learned about through these skill sections. Yeah. We have some terms for how different types of bias operate, and with some of the tools that we've been practicing and learning over these many episodes, have ways to move forward, like the thinking ahead that we've talked about, or getting individuating information as ways to, counteract or prevent bias. Yeah. If one of those is relevant when you're speaking up, or relevant to the type of behavior or the type of bias you're speaking up about, offer that to the person, giving them something concrete that they can do that'll be effective at addressing the bias. And then two last things that I'll say. Allies and authority figures hold a lot of sway. If you're in a position of leadership, it's more likely that when you speak up, people will hear it and take it to heart and do something about it. And then the unfortunate but pervasive truth is, when a white person speaks up about bias against people of color, it gets taken more seriously. When straight people speak up about bias against LGBT people, when men speak up about bias against women, research consistently shows it'll get taken more seriously, more likely for action to be taken on it. Right. A few episodes ago, I don't remember how many now, I shared a story where there was a person who spoke up about trans things and got a policy passed. Right. That kind of had some trans protections in it. And when that person then came out as trans themselves, it got rescinded. That's kind of the iconic negative example. I'm sure it was a negative story when I shared that during story time. But the idea is, so if I speak up about LGBT bias and people know I'm a gay man, some people are going to be like, well, he's trying to get something for himself. Right. He has some kind of selfish motivation. Right. But if a straight person speaks up about bias against LGBT people, they presumably don't have any kind of selfish motivation. Right. That it can't be dismissed as easily as when it's a gay person speaking up about that. Right. Again, not saying that's a good thing. Right. And I'm also not saying that if you are a member of the group targeted by bias, you shouldn't be speaking out. I'm saying we should all be speaking up.
And that goes back to the conversation we had with Nikki around kind of cross social movements, like solidarity and
accommodations and addressing these issues can help us all.
Yeah, all of that. That also that I can, as a straight person, speak up around queer issues and to lend my support, lend my power, lend my privilege to, again, help speak up about the issues that are coming up and to help move things in a direction of change.
Absolutely.
Being inequity agent of change.
Heck yes. Amber's referring to our nonprofit, which sponsors this podcast, Inequity Agents of Change.
Yes.
So we always like to bring in a little kind of therapeutic or just Amber-centered additional insight, often drawn from your experience as a practitioner. What do you have for us today? Is there something about speaking up?
Yeah. Well, I think, speaking up, it can be a variety of spaces, right? Like about it being, there's a self-advocacy aspect of that, and kind of building up one's own self-confidence in being able to speak up. And then there's also that sense of lending your voice to others. Again, lending your voice to other things that you're seeing, that can also be related to kind of self-efficacy, right? And like increasing one's ability to like own your space and yourself in different times and spaces. And I think that there's something really important about that. And I think that it can really help, again, around confidence and self-efficacy. But I'm reminded of, actually, I teach a lifespan development class, and I bring in folks that demonstrate that like developmental level. And every year I have a guest. Her name is Hadley. I won't give her last name, but her name is Hadley. She is currently 9 years old as the time of this episode. And had her come in to talk to my class, and she was talking about social justice.
Aww.
And my grad students were like, so what is that? Like, what do you mean? When she's like, well, so here, and she talked about that speaking up, but doing it and like calling people in. And I was like, so what do you mean by that? She's like, well, if somebody says something that I don't agree with, I don't want to call them out in front of everybody because they might feel ashamed. And I know that I would feel ashamed and I might lash out. And she's like, so exactly. She's like, I'm going to call them over to the side and have a conversation with them and use my relationship with them to like help motivate them to like.
What college textbook has she been reading?
I was like, who is this 9-year-old? I'm so proud of you. The way that she did it, and like I could just see the like shock and awe of all of my grad students going like, okay, is she in grad school right now? Like, what is happening? But it's just really beautiful, and I love to hear that her understanding as a 9-year-old, she's being taught these ideas, that she's in internalizing them, and then she's now putting them into action in different aspects of her life, both for herself. It's giving her a sense of like, I don't feel I'm able to acknowledge and recognize when things are not happening, but I also have, again, the self-efficacy I'm empowered to know how to have these conversations in ways that are going to be helpful, that can actually promote change, that can actually engage with somebody else. So I think that it's exciting to see youngins there. And again, I think this sense of speaking up really clinically ties to a lot of self-efficacy.
Well, and that is the perfect setup for this question that we brought in today. And usually I read off the question, but today, do you want to? Since I've got answers.
You've got thoughts, yeah. So really, the question is: so if I'm the victim of a bias, a stereotype, or something that has happened, do I have to be the one to like speak up?
Thank you. And, I get this question. I don't know if a lot is the right word, but occasionally. And the idea here is I've just been victimized or been the target of some kind of bias. And then, you gave all these guidelines about how to speak up effectively, and you need to target the behavior, not the person, and all this stuff. And then it's like, all that's extra burden on me as the victim.
And I have also just been like harmed, and my emotions are charged.
And so that question comes up. And my answer to that is no, you do not have to be the one to address address it. Those are guidelines. Those are for everyone.
Yeah.
This is what research says makes it more effective. Am I saying that you, as someone who's just been targeted by something, has been victimized, has been hurt?
Yep.
All I say to you is the only thing you need to do is take care of yourself.
Yes.
You have to feel what you need to feel,
Yep.
get to a safe place if that's what's relevant.
Yep.
Absolutely not. It is not your responsibility to also be the bigger person and then like go to, Dr. Cox's advice about here's how you change that other. It is not your responsibility to change anyone else. I want everything we do with this podcast, everything we do with our work at delivering this training that I do and so on. I want to empower people to speak up, encourage that kind of speaking up.
Absolutely.
But this is not about if you just directly been the victim, you have to push that aside and be the bigger person and all that stuff. No, you take care of yourself.
Yep.
If you get to a point where you feel like you are up to it and you want to take that on, I commend that. But it is never an obligation that I would put on someone who has just been victimized because it hurts. It is hard. You have and there's so many forces in society telling people to just deal with those emotions, blah blah blah, and marginalizing those experiences. And I'm like, hell to the no.
And I think it's important because what we're saying is giving folks permission to not have to, again, be the bigger person, to not have to be the one to walk somebody through how to do the repair, how to do those things. I often talk about it as if you've just had a traumatic incident, like a physically traumatic incident, and your arm is, let's say, I'm going to be graphic, severed open, right? Bone is sticking out, you're gushing blood, right? Like, this is clearly a trauma. I am dealing with this. Now, all of a sudden, you get quote unquote help on the scene, and they're asking you, like, so what do you need from me? Like, what do I have to do? And I'm like, so now you're asking me to be the one to diagnose the problem. You're supposed to be the one helping me right now. Yeah. And now you're asking me to diagnose the problem, walk you through how to like put a tourniquet on and like take care of me. And that's often the space, especially, folks that are in margins, and anybody that has had some sort of a negative experience, and people expect that of us. They expect us to stay calm, to tell them what you need, to address the problem in a way that kind of moves us forward. And so really what we're talking about, again, is giving folks the permission to say, no, you don't have to, you don't have to sit in that space. And you don't even have to address it right then, right there, or at all.
And I think this is this recognition and this realization and how we've been talking about it today is a really good example of what I value in our relationship and our mutual approaches. So this idea I've talked about in some previous episodes, I think of myself now as a scientist-practitioner. Right. And then you kind of like, and I'm kind of a practitioner scientist. Yes. And it's where those two things meet that we can have some of these insights. And I want to share a little extra story time, I guess. Yeah. I was in some of my early days, just out of my PhD, doing a very early, different version of the bias habit breaking training that we talk about all the time with some colleagues. And we were in a grad school department where there were a lot of issues of race and gender bias with these grad students. And one of the grad students asked us, like, so, you've given us all these tools for how to work on bias, but it kind of like as it was a woman of color, and she was like, as a woman of color, I'm the one who's already having the extra burden of dealing with stuff. And so like, what do you have to say about kind of dealing with that burden, and how do I address the kind of power structures or something like that? And I was so, the answer my colleague gave was so unfortunate. It was so scientist only, not scientist practitioner. And it was like, well, the research says you need to go to the top and work with leadership, and they have the most power to influence change and something. And ... And I was like, I had to kind of contradict her. I was like, that is what the science says. But I said to this individual, I was like, but I am never going to tell you you need another burden on top of the burden you're already facing. Like if you find that strength and find that space in your life, please. And all of these insights from science that we have will help with that. But as a practitioner, as a human being, I am never going to say you need that extra burden. And it's in the scientist practitioner space. Science can tell us all this stuff about what's most effective, what's most persuasive, what's more, but in doing this as a practitioner as well, seeing the real challenges and understanding that space where it's like, well, I can give you all the tips in the world, but if you're not taking care of yourself, actually, I care more about that.
Absolutely.
And wellness. That's back on our main theme, right?
Exactly.
But yeah. So
when it goes back again, it goes back to speaking up. It goes back to, using your allyhood, advocacy, power, privilege, like my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Gathercole, stepping in and saying, I see this, you've done enough by speaking up even in this space, or recognizing that this is a thing, and I'm going to do those things and recognize that. So I think they're all really tied together today. Yeah. Oh, and welcome back. So we are right at the end of the episode today, and we're just going to finish out with our joyful recommendations. And Will, what is your recommendation today?
Well, something that I have loved for a long time, and just today found out that Amber also adores.
Yes.
There's a TV show called Steven Universe. It was on Cartoon Network. Our producer will tell us in a bit where it streams now, but it was an amazing, groundbreaking animated TV show created by an amazing writer and showrunner, Rebecca Sugar.
That's a fun name.
I know, right? I think she and her brother have that last name Sugar, and I think that went into the main character, Steven Universe, and having that fun last name. But the show, it's a supernatural kind of space fantasy, magic-y kind of show, but it deals with so many real issues. It deals with things like trauma, family acceptance, mental health, a whole lot of stuff about gender and sexuality. It has non-binary and trans characters. It had the first ever same-sex marriage to be portrayed in a kids' TV show.
Wow.
And it has some amazing music.
Yes, it does.
A lot of it involving the pop star Estelle.
Yes.
She's amazing, and she also voices one of the main characters. And it's a show that's just full of lots of girl power and a really great exemplar in the main character, Steven, as a male character, a boy who is in touch with his emotions and is compassionate and loving. And I just can't recommend it enough for adults, for kids, all of the above. And also, I think for parents out there, I imagine it would be a great thing to watch with your kids to have discussions about all those issues that I listed off that it touches, and there are many more.
Absolutely. I actually started watching this because of your recommendation. Like one of the the first time that we met, we were geeking out on all of the things, and you talked about Steven Universe, and then I checked out. I was like, oh my gosh, this show is amazing. And I use it again with my therapy clients. I'm a pediatric psychologist, so I predominantly work with kiddos, though I give it to adults as well. And there's a song in there called Here Comes a Thought. And I use it when we're talking about like mindfulness and like thinking through like, okay, how like a thought's going to come in, like thoughts. We can't control all of our thoughts, but we can choose what we're like ruminating on, what we're staying on. And that's what the whole song is about. Like the thought's going to come in, kind of letting it go. And it's just a really great, it's calming. It's got great visuals. And I play it for my students in grad school. So I definitely, and just the storyline, it's fun. It deals with a lot of different things. So yeah, Steven Universe. Yeah. Definitely check it out.
And like the soundtrack. Like
Yeah,
even just
yeah.
the instrumental soundtrack and the singing vocals soundtrack, both amazing, and they bop.
Yes.
As Eric Roman likes to say, it's a bop.
It's a bop. It's a bop.
And can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, agree.
And so it was a full show of a few seasons. Then there was a movie, and then there was kind of an epilogue show, Steven Universe Future, where you get to see them a little more grown up, and that was also cool. And the creator has said that, you know, she thinks the characters deserve their privacy for a while, but that someday we might check back in with them. So there could be more in the future, which I would look forward to, because it is just hands down one of the best shows out there ever.
Yep.
Of all time.
Of all time, for sure.
Great.
I love that.
Well, so that always brings me joy. Always. Yes. It's a joyful show.
It's a good one. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, just so you know, I'm Dr. William Cox.
And I'm Dr. Amber Nelson.
Produced by Eric Roman Binding. With music by Jay Arner. Diverse Joy is consumable as either an audio-only podcast or a video podcast, both accessible at diversejoy.com. Diverse Joy is the official podcast of Inequity Agents of Change, a nonprofit devoted to the dissemination of evidence-based approaches to reduce bias, create inclusion, promote equity, and enhance diversity. All that good Jedi work! Learn more at biashabit.com. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Boom.
Whoop, whoop.